So this unit of the course is yet another dramatic shift. Last time we were talking about Darwin and the development of the idea of natural selection and how Darwin made use of a utilitarian background, a romantic background, and changed the way science was considered and conducted through his extraordinary efforts at classification, at observation, classification, and then theorizing. Darwin's naturalization of ethics, his naturalization of morality were revolutionary at the time and had enormous repercussions all over the world, and they still have repercussions today. But we're going to move back across the channel this week, and in this unit we're going to be talking about two very different kinds of thinkers, Charles Baudelaire, a French poet, and Friedrich Nietzsche, a German philosopher. Now, what do they have in common? They both are concerned with intensity rather than morality. And that's a headline for this week. Intensity replaces morality. And both of them are thinkers whose work becomes very important for postmodernism much later. We'll talk more about that as we go through the reading, but just as a point of orientation, Baudelaire and Nietzsche reject the hierarchies that had governed ethics, politics, and aesthetics, and in so doing developed a framework for making poetry and philosophy, respectively, that was outside of the traditional hierarchies in Western culture. And that anti-foundationalism, it's a word we'll use more towards the end of this course, their anti-foundationalism, their rejection of the standard hierarchies, will be appropriated by postmodernists after the Second World War. Of course, neither of them could have anticipated that at all, writing in the second half of the 19th century. So today we're going to focus on Baudelaire. We're going to spend quite a bit of time just reading the prose poems. I'm going to use this edition of Paris Spleen to remind you of the reading. I hope you've done the reading at home or wherever you do your reading, in a cafe or lying on a grassy knoll somewhere. But we'll refresh your memory and try to organize some of those prose poems in light of the themes of this course. The heading for my discussion of Baudelaire is From Dissection to Permeation. And it's not a very elegant phrase, but what I'm getting at here is that Flaubert, we talked about a few weeks ago, Flaubert emphasized this dissection was revenge. Flaubert thought that by analyzing the bourgeois society around him through narrative, by showing it in all its horrifying banality, that he was giving you a way to condemn or reject or distance yourself from it. Flaubert didn't express opinions. No, he actually said several times that I should not express, as an artist, I should not express an opinion about the world. My job is, like God's, to create the world. Flaubert was not a modest artist. He was the most ambitious artist. He wasn't expressing opinions, but he was dissecting the world around him in a way that would distance his readers and his fellow artists from it. Baudelaire certainly engaged in a kind of dissection, but for Baudelaire the point was to plunge into the world. Remember, Flaubert talked about going up in the world only up to your navel. He said he wanted safe art. He didn't want to get infected by the world. Baudelaire literally was willing to get infected, and in fact, he dies of syphilis. But he plunges himself into the world, into drugs, into sex, into the crowd. He plunges himself into the world. But that's not enough. He also is destined to make great art from the world. So about his times, Baudelaire is coming of age in the middle of the 19th century. He's a bit of a mama's boy, I guess we could say. You can look up some biographical tidbits about Baudelaire, but for our purposes, I want you to understand that Baudelaire is very much torn by his affection for and dependence on his mother and his real hatred for his stepfather. Baudelaire's mother remarries after her husband dies, and they don't know. Baudelaire's stepfather is an army officer, and he arouses all of Baudelaire's aggression against authority, against stodgy conventionalism. His parents, they try to send him away. They send him on a boat trip to just kind of toughen him up. Baudelaire escapes and makes his way back to Paris. The story is that during the revolutionary times of 1848, Baudelaire joins in the crowd of revolutionaries, but he's after his stepdad. He's after authority in general. But when they talk of what should we do next? What should we do next? We revolutionaries, Baudelaire says, we have to kill General Opique. That's his stepfather. He wants to he is consumed with anger against the parental generation and against authority, and is willing to fight it. His parents, his father died when he was quite young. His mother doted on him, loved him greatly. Then she marries a new guy, a military officer. And Baudelaire's, he is your hipster druggie. And so they say, you go to school in Lyon. You know what happens to him in school? He gets kicked out of school. Why? Because he was passing the note. Somebody was passing him a note in class. You know the story? So he's passing him a note in class, and the teacher says, "Just like I did. This was just a little staged Baudelairean moment. You hadn't read the script." In Baudelaire's case, he said to them, "Give me that note. You're passing notes. Give me a note." Baudelaire said, "I will not give it to you, monsieur," or words to that effect. "Give me the note." I know. "I will never violate the confidence of my compatriot," or words to that effect. And so they kick him out. Gets kicked out of school, which Baudelaire's like, woohoo! So his parents don't know what to do with this guy. So they send him on a boat to India. Study abroad! What are you laughing about? What do you think your parents do? What do you think we have in our Westland? It's called exporting social tension. Don't tell that financial aid. Go abroad, yes. I'm kidding. But they did send him on a boat to India, and he loved the boat for a while. All that immensity and all. But then he got really freaked out and needed stimulation, shall we say. And he left. He got off the boat. He made his way back to Paris. And then when revolutions occur in 1848, this we don't know. I don't know if this is true, but it's apocryphal. It's a story that about Baudelaire. He's in a mob, and they're running through the streets of Paris in February 1848, and they have the guns, and they're all like, "Where should we go? Where should we go to make revolution?" And he's like, the General Opique. We have to kill the General Opique. Guess who that was? His stepfather. I'm like, "Who's that?" He says, "Don't worry, he's very powerful. We must hard kill him." It's so great. Can you imagine that? The part? They're like, "Okay, let's go get him." But they were a bunch of young revolutionaries who were rather drinking and smoking dope and talking about poetry, and so they didn't get the General Opique. So what Baudelaire does, again, this is what one says. These are stories one tells about it. It's hard to know if this really happened. But he gets a gun, and he aims, and he shoots a clock. You know that from here, the tyranny of time. What would be a revolution? Stop this. God, stop these clocks. Why do we have class during a certain amount of time? Why do we have an hour and 20 minutes on Baudelaire, an hour and 20 minutes on Nietzsche? Because that's the way we package your education, so it's more convenient for faculty members to do their thing and go home and do their own work. It's more convenient for you to get credit by showing up in class. Doesn't really matter if you do anything, you just have to be here. It's very convenient. But for Baudelaire, it's like, that's the tyranny of it. Just blow it up. Shoot the clock. Stop time. And then see how it feels to be in the world without an expectation that you have to be somewhere else soon. Remember, there is a revolution, February 1848. It seems to go so well. The conservative monarch, well, not that conservative, Louis Philippe, he is deposed, and then, but by June of 1848, the workers are massacred in the streets. They get a dictatorship by end of 1851 under Louis Napoleon Bonaparte, a kind of resurgence of conservative authority in France, and for our purposes with Baudelaire, most importantly, what you get is the remaking of Paris. The remaking of Paris by Baron Haussmann. And this is, we talk about this as the Haussmannization of Paris. And what that means is that the city is architecturally reconstructed. That is, these Grand Boulevards, the big wide streets that you know of from the pictures of Paris, the Champs-Élysées, for example. These are constructed during this period, and it is an immense civic undertaking where entire neighborhoods that had been much the same for centuries are bulldozed, they're destroyed, and you have these major arteries carved out through the center of Paris. And this is the most important modernization project in urban Europe that had ever taken place until that time. Baudelaire's poetry is in some ways a response to that project. And I want to just give you a few facts about it. Baron Haussmann really changes the nature of the city. Before 1840, more than 60% of Parisians don't leave their neighborhoods. They really stay in their neighborhoods all the time. You get your food there, you have your artisans there, your friends and family, or right in your little quartier, your little neighborhood. And that completely changes as Paris develops economic centers that people travel to in the city. And the city becomes an integrated whole, and modernization ensues. In the late 1850s, about 20% or more of the population of the city is involved in rebuilding Paris. So from 1853 to 1870, Paris becomes a new kind of place. New kinds of lights illuminate the boulevard. New kinds of people you see all the time. You bump into people you never would have seen before. And that bumping into people you never would have seen before, that becomes the material for Baudelaire's poetry. So, Baudelaire's poetry comes out of this new confrontation, encounter, mixing of peoples in the modernizing urban center that Paris is becoming. And there are two terms that I want you to keep in mind in thinking about Baudelaire in this regard. Jerry Siegel, a wonderful intellectual historian at New York University, has talked about this in various places. The terms are the flaneur, and the dandy. Let's start with the dandy. What's a dandy? I asked my class this here at Wesleyan, and lots of people throw out examples of folks who overdress, who display a kind of exaggerated public persona, and it could be in various ways. It's certainly a departure from convention, but often by using convention, right? Sometimes we talk about it here as the dandy is the kind of the hipster gone to an extreme. Here in the Northeast, It often involves wearing a scarf, apparently, according to my students. When I was a student, it had to do with smoking clove cigarettes and listening to music no one else understood. But it was a kind of public presentation of difference, of exaggerated willingness, even desire to be seen. The dandy wants to be seen. And so in Paris, you get this, as you walk down the boulevard, as you are strolling, you're not just walking, you're not just strolling, you are there on display. And the dandy is willing to say, yeah, look at me, I am on display. And so that figure is important for Baudelaire and his friends, a willingness to say, I'm not going to just wear a black suit and a black hat and a nice cravat. No, I am here to be looked at. Look at me. That kind of aestheticizing of everyday life is what the dandy is about, to give it a more highfalutin term. The aestheticizing of everyday life. But on the other side of that is the bohemian. Now, the bohemian is the person who kind of dresses down, right? It's the rich kid on campus who always wears torn clothes. It's the person who wants to hang out with those people who they identify as not yet corrupted by bourgeois society. The bohemians are the ones who are living in a garret, living the life on the margins, not just because they have to. They're not just poor, although they may be poor. They're living in poverty because they think poverty is an escape from bourgeois convention. And Baudelaire, as a poet, he vacillates between the dandy and the bohemian, the display of exaggerated performance and even of wealth, or at least of costume, and the bohemian, the exaggerated poverty that as a political and aesthetic statement. I'm not conventional in either case, right? They're both anti-conventional. Now, this other term, flaneur, is one that is very important to Baudelaire, and it is a city term. It means really that you are strolling around, flâner, the flaneur strolls around without purpose, moving through the city's streets without going to a particular place. Now, it's not hiking, which, it's not a healthy, we're marching through the forest kind of thing. And it's not, I've got to hurry up and get to work or go shopping. It is, I am moving through the city. I'm just making my way around because I don't know what I'm going to encounter. See, the flaneur is open to suggestion. And for Baudelaire, that's really important for the poet, that is to be open to possibility. You don't know what you're going to run into. Most of us live in situations where we constrict possibility in favor of security or convention. You see the people you want to see. Segregation ensures that in many places in this country and abroad. Segregation by class, by race, by gender sometimes. But the flaneur says, no, I'm crossing those boundaries. Why? I don't know. Something may happen. Somebody who experiences the social milieu by just walking around. Somebody who to flâner is just to walk without goal. What's very important is you don't go out in order to experience the social milieu. You don't have to because that would defeat. You can't have a purpose. So yeah, I guess yesterday we were in Massachusetts and we were going for a little hike, and my daughter says, so what's the point? Where are we going? Because we start off and we walk and we come back to where we left the car. It's called a hike, right? And she goes, this is always my attitude when first got married. I didn't understand why you'd go to a hike and you couldn't buy something on the way. And so she says, what's the goal? Where's the goal? I'm like, you don't have to have a goal, Sophie. Read some Baudelaire. She's like, Daddy, you really want me to be like that? I said, no, I just want you to read it. But there's no goal. If you're a flaneur, you walk around. Is there anyone you know at West End like this now? When I was a student, there were people like that. They looked like students, kind of, and you got close, you realized they were like in their 30s. And they would be kind of walking around, hey, how you doing? How classes? Yeah, they got Roth? Yeah, did you get your test back? And you're like, who is that guy? Right? Strolling about without a goal. Because by strolling about, Walt Whitman called it loafing about. You might just discover something completely unexpected. But if you go out to discover it, if you go out there with, I am going to discover something, you're probably not going to get it. You have to be receptive rather than aggressively inquiring. You have to loaf, or you have to be a flâneur, in Baudelaire's terms. So, Baudelaire's Paris spleen, it takes up these themes. I'm looking here at my notes on my iPad. Baudelaire takes up these themes in order to make a poetry that is responsive to modernity, is responsive to the new possibilities that modernity contains because of its disruptive capacity. This disruptive capacity is so important to Baudelaire. And even the forms of Baudelaire's writings are key in this regard. He doesn't write poetry in the conventional sense. In Paris Spleen, he's writing prose poems, right? A hybrid. A hybrid is what he wants. Hybridity, again, a term that will come up in the late 20th century, again, as a term of possibility. Hybridity, again, breaks through convention. So let's just look at an example of this in Baudelaire's case, where he's taking making a poem out of an encounter with a traditional figure of the city that he is radically disrupting, and it's a poem called "The Bad Glazier." It's a poem 9 in Paris Spleen. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but I want to remind you of the scene. Baudelaire's narrator is in an apartment. Here's the call of an artisan, a guy who walks around the city, and this happened regularly in the late 19th century. And we can maybe find a picture to show you. Attier did some wonderful photographs of artisans who carried their wares on their back. Right? There's a famous Attier picture of the artisan walking around with lampshades, carrying lots of lampshades on his back as he walks through the city. And here, the guy, the artisan, is a glazier. He's selling pieces of glass. He's walking around saying, "Glass for sale, right? And Baudelaire hears this, as one could any time in his period. And he invites the fellow up to his apartment, he calls him up and asks him to walk up all of the all of the stairs to his high apartment. Here it goes. This is about 2/3 of the way through the prose poem. "The first person I noticed in the street was a glazier whose piercing and discordant cry floated up to me through the heavy, filthy Paris air. It would be impossible for me to say when I was suddenly seized by an arbitrary and loathing of this poor man. 'Hey, hey,' I shouted, motioning him to come up, and the thought that my room was 6 flights up the stairs and that the man must be having a terrible time getting up them with his fragile wares added not a little to my hilarity." He's making this guy walk up with all his glass. "Finally he appeared. After looking curiously over his panes of glass one by one, I exclaimed, 'What? You have no colored glass, no pink, no red, no blue? No magic panes, no panes of paradise?' No panes of paradise, isn't that one of them? 'Scoundrel, what do you mean by going into poor neighborhoods without a single glass to make life beautiful?' And I pushed him, stumbling and grumbling, toward the stairs. Going out on my balcony, I picked up a little flower pot, and when the glazier appeared at the entrance below, I let my engine of war fall down perpendicularly on the edge of his pack. The shock knocked him over, and falling on his back, he succeeded in breaking the rest of his poor ambulatory stock with a shattering noise as of lightning striking a crystal palace. And drunk with my madness, I shouted down at him furiously, Make life beautiful. Make life beautiful. Such erratic pranks are not without danger, and often one has to pay dearly for them. But what is an eternity of damnation compared to an infinity of pleasure in a single second? That's the Baudelairean ethos I want you to really focus on. What is an eternity of damnation compared to an infinity of pleasure in a single second? There is no principle prior to nature, or no nature that really is at stake here. So I do think it is about, I say ecstasy in the slide, but that's just a bigger word for pleasure. It's about the intensity of pleasure. And to someone who would say, well, how is that going to help anybody? He's like, I don't care if it helps anybody. This is a poetry thing. This is not about helping people. This is not about making things nice. This is about seeking pleasure that is not bound by conformity. That's what artists do. You want to be a bureaucrat, you want to go work and help the community, do that, but don't call yourself an artist. You want to use arts to help people learn how to read, great, you're doing literacy training. If you're doing art, you have to be prepared to do things that everybody else finds disgusting. And if you're not prepared to do that, that's fine. Be a lawyer. Well, actually, that won't work, will it? But at least people won't find disgusting immediately. But for Baudelaire, well, this is the last part of the poem, right? Such erratic pranks are not without danger. That's what we've been saying. And one often has to pay dearly for them. The guy comes up and beats the heck out of the poet. Actually, he's a poet. He can be beaten up. Although we'll come back to that, right? But what is an eternity of damnation compared to an infinity of pleasure in a single second? And that's, again, that's the ethos. This is what I mean by intensity. Intensity replaces morality. It is Baudelaire's well aware this is dangerous. People pay dearly for this. He might get his head kicked in later on for this kind of thing. Fine. But Baudelaire's poetry is telling us, I want intensity. I don't want conventionality. And anything that you can do to pursue intensity might lead, actually, to real poetry or real art. So another key theme for Baudelaire is inequality, something that you can come across all the time in the modern city. Now, of course, there was inequality before modernity, and perhaps even more so. But the different groups were less likely to encounter one another than they were in the modern city. So what happens in Paris as you carve out these arteries after Haussmannization, what happens in Paris as you carve out these big boulevards is that you have people bumping into each other from different social classes. You have more possibility of confrontation, of hybridity, of mixture. And then the confrontation also is a confrontation with inequality. Let's look at the poem Cake, for example, which is prose poem 15 in Paris Spleen. When Baudelaire describes, he's in this beautiful landscape. He says the countryside is around him, as he says, was an inexpressible grandeur and sublimity. This is a typical Baudelairean beginning of a prose poem. He's evoking romantic tropes in the beginning of his poems, often in Paris Spleen. The first paragraph, the first lines will often evoke very traditional language of beauty, of this here sublimity, of grandeur. The landscape is so great. And then by the end of the poem, he overturns this. And here, he's sitting there peacefully cutting up his bread, as he says at the bottom of the first paragraph, or the beginning of the second. And then he sees a little kid, a little street urchin there, very poor, staring at him, and the kid says to him, "Gâteau, cake, cake." And so, and Baudelaire's surprised because it's just bread. The kid is so poor, and even bread seems to him cake. And as the poem unfurls, he gives the kid a piece of this bread, and suddenly another kid arrives. Right? Suddenly another kid arrives, and they start fighting over this. And the cake traveled. The cake traveled from hand to hand and changed pockets at every instant while they're fighting. Right? Changing, alas, in size as well. And when finally exhausted and panting and covered with blood, they stopped from the sheer impossibility of going on. No cause for feud remained. The piece of bread had disappeared, and the crumbs scattered all around were indistinguishable from the grains of sand with which they were mingled. The performance had darkened the landscape, Baudelaire writes, and the calm joy gladdening my soul before the appearance of the two little wretches had completely vanished. Saddened, I sat there for a long time, saying over and over to myself, so here is a superb country where bread is called cake and is so rare a delicacy that it's enough to start a war, literally fratricidal. Poverty is a great theme in Baudelaire's poetry. Poverty is not to be romanticized, but poverty is a horrible fact in the landscape of the poet's life. Another poem I want to call your attention to is The Eyes of the Poor, which is poem 26 in Paris Spleen. When we're here, because this prose poem gives you a feel for the changing city. Here he's with his lover, Baudelaire's with his lover. They're wandering around the city. They have had this wonderful day, but at the end of the day, their distance from each other, their separation from each other comes to the fore. Here Baudelaire starts the poem not in a romantic way, but in a kind of shocking, get your attention way. The first line, so you would like to know why I hate you today. Right? This is his the first line. So you would like to know why I hate you today. And then he goes on to explain, as they were wandering through Paris and they see these new cafes, the new boulevard, the new sparkling lights. Here's, the cafe was dazzling. Even the gas burned with the ardor of a debut. And lighted with all its might the blinding whiteness of the walls, the expanse of mirrors, the gold cornices and moldings, fat-cheeked pages dragged along by hounds on leash, laughing ladies with falcons on their wrists, nymphs and goddesses bearing on their heads piles of fruits, pâtés, and game. He goes on and on. That there's a wealth, luxury, what does he say? All history and mythology pandering to gluttony. Isn't that great? All history and mythology pandering to gluttony. They're just serving these rich people more and more stuff beyond their appetites. But then, on the street directly in front of us, a worthy man of about 40, with tired face and graying beard, was standing holding a small boy by the hand, and carrying on his arm another little thing, still too weak to walk. He was playing nursemaid, taking the children for an evening stroll. They were in rags. The three faces were extraordinarily serious, and those 6 eyes stared fixedly at the new cafe with admiration, equal in degree, but differing in kind, according to their ages. I'll skip the next paragraph. You can read it yourself of the different reactions of the father and the children. Songwriters say that pleasure ennobles the soul and softens the heart. The song was right that evening as far as I was concerned, Baudelaire writes. Not only was I touched by this family of eyes, but I was even a little ashamed of our glasses and decanters, too big for our thirst. We had too much stuff. I turned my eyes to look into yours, dear love, to read my thoughts in them. And as I plunged my eyes into your eyes, so beautiful and so curiously soft, into those green eyes, home of caprice and governed by the moon, you said, those people are insufferable with their great saucer eyes. Can't you tell the proprietor to send them away? So you see how difficult it is to understand one another, my dear angel. How incommunicable thought is, even between two people in love. Baudelaire is talking here about the impermeability between people, even between, perhaps especially between lovers. You know, in French, impermeable is a raincoat. Things just slide right off. The rain just slides right off, right? And we're impermeable to each other. We slide off each other. We don't communicate with each other. I looked into her eyes, and what I saw was nothing that I expected. This is for Baudelaire the occasion for sorrow, for pain, that we are impermeable to one another, but is also the occasion for great poetry, for trying to see how poetry can bridge these gaps, how poetry, how writing, how art can overcome this incommunicable feature of daily life. Here in the new Paris, people bump into each other all the time. They bump into each other all the time, but they never actually communicate with each other. They never actually manage to connect. And that is more painful in the modern city because the friction is much greater, because so many more people are confronting each other. Let's take one more poem here, and then we'll try to sum things up. We could go on and on. These are so wonderful. But the poem is Miss Bistouri, which is towards the end of the book, poem 47 in the Paris Spleen. It just gives you, it's another story where Baudelaire's walking around, and a woman comes up to him and says, "Aren't you a doctor, honey? Aren't you a doctor?" He's like, "No, I'm not a doctor. Leave me alone." "Oh, you're a doctor. You're a doctor." And he has this encounter, and she kind of seduces him, I suppose you can say. "You're a doctor who likes to have his little joke," the woman says to him. Come on, come with me. Come back to my house, my apartment." Baudelaire says, "I am passionately fond of mystery because I always hope to discover the solution." And he goes back to her apartment with her. They have their encounter, and she describes to him why she likes doctors so much. She says to him, this is about 2/3 of the way through the poem, she has a lover who's a doctor, and she says she takes care of him, but she really would like to see him come with his instrument case and his apron, even with a little blood on it. And Baudelaire is shocked by these revelations, by this, he seems to portray a sweet person who comes up to him out of blue in the street, and with this on the street, who has this, well, we might just have to say, a perversion of wanting the doctor with the blood on the apron with instruments coming to her apartment. And Baudelaire's trying to understand, when did you first have this feeling? He says to her, as if he were a therapist in the modern period. Where did this come from? He says. And then he concludes, because she says, "I don't know. I don't remember. I don't remember." And the last paragraph of the poem. "What oddities one finds in big cities when one knows how to roam and how to look." That's it. That's the Baudelairean aesthetic. What oddities one finds in big cities when one knows how to roam and how to look. Life swarms with innocent monsters. And that phrase, innocent monsters, is one I want you to retain for Baudelaire. That's what he's looking for. The unconventional, the perverse, the twisted, the glorious, but with a kind of innocence, because they come upon their difference honestly. Life swarms with innocent monsters. Lord my God, you the creator, you the master, you who have made both law and liberty, you the sovereign who permits, you the judge who pardons, you who contain all motives and all causes, and who perhaps have put a taste for the horrible in my mind in order to convert my heart, like the cure at the point of the knife. Lord, have pity on mad men and mad women. O Creator, can monsters exist in the eyes of the one who alone knows why they exist, who alone knows how they have been made and how they could not have been made? Of course, Baudelaire is also the creator, right? He creates these innocent monsters in his poems. And they're no longer monsters to him in some way, right? They're parts of the fabric of the city that most of us, most of the time, pretend to ignore or prefer to ignore. O Creator, can monsters exist in the eyes of the one who alone knows why they exist, who alone knows how they have been made and how they could not have been made? Baudelaire is the poet of innocent monstrosity, whereas Rousseau tries his best to show us that we have become monsters and we can cure ourselves. Baudelaire says, you have become so ordinary, but there are monsters among us. I want to be near them. I want to make poetry with them, from them. Because the world is just too conventional without that innocent monstrosity. That's the stuff of art. That's the stuff of modernity. So Baudelaire's aesthetic really is a jump from what we've seen before. He, unlike Rousseau, is not looking for natural human beings. He's not looking for authentic human beings. He's not mocking them with ironic distance, as Flaubert did. He's not trying to cure us of the disease of modernity, as Marx wanted to. Baudelaire, instead, is marveling at the unexpected encounters that society brings us. So Baudelaire is a poet of modernity because Baudelaire embraces the unexpected, the encounter that occurs because of the fluidity of the modern city. He is not looking for something underneath all of this change and all of this difference that will explain it away or provide a new framework to make us more comfortable, make us more at ease with it. He is embracing multiplicity and without recourse to authenticity. Remember, Rousseau talked about the importance of honesty and a kind of the wrestling naked that Rousseau uses as the metaphor for stripping away our disguises and being really there for one another. Baudelaire says, let's put on some makeup. I mean, for Baudelaire, maquillage, makeup, is really the great art of the his contemporary world. Because it's not about stripping away disguise, it's about putting on the right disguises. And what makes them right? Well, do they work? Do they attract attention? Do they find you the people that will bring you this intensity, these intense encounters? A great poem of Baudelaire's is To a Passerby, À une passante, which is a poem about what happens in the modern city, which didn't happen before. It's very unlikely to happen before. So you will see someone and catch, his case, he said, I catch her eye. I catch her eye. And then she's gone. And I was so close to her, and yet now she's gone. I'll never see her again. And yet that moment, that spark, that incitement of desire, that's what he lives for. Not the possibility of marriage and connection and authentic building a life together. No. It's about the flâneur, right? It's about strolling. It's about that encounter with unexpected pleasure that can't be planned and can't be explained. Make life beautiful is what Baudelaire says, whatever it takes. And we'll have to pick up the story of that search for intensity with Nietzsche in our next lecture.